Let's continue our look at Tennyson's Ulysses by looking at the second section of the poem, which is by far the shortest of the three. The setting has changed. Ulysses is now apparently on a dock, getting ready to leave. He seems to be addressing the citizens of his kingdom. "This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle." The scepter is a staff held by a king on a throne. It represents authority. "Well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good." Discerning is used in an unusual way here. Usually it means insightful. Here it means more striving. This labor refers to governing the kingdom. Telemachus is going to use patience to subdue these rugged people to useful and good living. "Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine." The phrase common duties is kind of ambiguous. It means the day-to-day business of running the kingdom. Some have suggested that the word common implies that Ulysses looks down a little on such work. He has grander designs. The reference to household gods is simply a reminder that in this ancient setting there was a belief in many gods, polytheism. The last line of this short section sums it up. He, Telemachus, does his work, I mine. So that ends the second section. In the third section, the setting has changed again. Now Ulysses is sailing out of the harbor. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. So he looks back and sees the port fading in the background. Then he looks forward and sees the dark, broad seas. Then he addresses his crew, his mariners. These are the same old boys that sailed with him on his trip home from Troy many years ago. "My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Yes, we're old, but we may have in us yet some work of noble note to do." The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. Wanes means to decrease. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. So it's twilight. They are heading out to sea in the darkness. "Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows." These ancient ships were propelled forward by many sailors using oars. So they would be sitting well in order with their oars. To smite is to slap or hit. So the oars are hitting the waves, the sounding furrows. "For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die." So what does their future hold? It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the Happy Isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. The Happy Isles is the ancient Greek version of heaven. So he is saying we might drown, and that will cause us to go to the world beyond, the Happy Isles. And we will see the great Achilles, one of the epic heroes of the Iliad, who has already died. Though much is taken, much abides, much remains. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That last line is one of the most quoted lines in English poetry. Tennyson really did have a gift for the quotable line. I read somewhere that he's still one of the most quoted poets in the English language. In fact, the last line of this poem was used as the motto for my high school senior class, though I'm sure one of the English teachers must have picked it because none of us students had ever heard of Tennyson's Ulysses. Okay, so that's the poem. Now, what's the point? What does it mean? This poem can be interpreted in two diametrically opposite ways. First, we can interpret this as a heroic poem, with Ulysses being an admirable, indomitable hero. He refuses to give in to age. He is determined to keep a questing spirit and pursue truth and knowledge with every fiber of his being. And he's fearless. He's not afraid of death. His focus is on living fully with however much time he has left. And the heroic language of this poem tends to reinforce this interpretation. Roaming with a hungry heart, drinking life to the lees, following knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Those are pretty high-flying, noble phrases. But there is a second interpretation of this poem that goes in the other direction, and this interpretation says that Ulysses is an old fool. He says he longs for some work of noble note. But he has a work of noble note right in front of him, to govern his people. They need good government. They need to be shown how to live useful and good lives. But Ulysses doesn't want to do that. It's hard. It involves a painstaking daily grind. So he passes that job off to his son, and he rounds up his old buddies, and they go sailing off. They don't know where, and they don't know for what. The interesting thing about this poem is that there is plenty of textual evidence to support both positions. That's one of the things that makes it a good poem to me. The longer you look at it, the more layers and dimensions you see in it. I've carried this poem around inside me for a long time and thought about it a long time. And here's my somewhat wishy-washy take on it. Ulysses is, to some degree, shirking a duty. Governing his people is a work of noble note, and he is unwilling to do it anymore. But you know, Socrates said that the beginning of wisdom is to know thyself. I suspect that Ulysses knows himself well enough to know that he is simply not suited for what in modern life we might call a desk job. Perhaps he can see that Telemachus is better suited for that. So he passes the job off to him. It's true that Ulysses sails off in search of some hazy, unknown adventures. But some people are just hardwired to do that. And the world needs people like Telemachus, the good administrators who can handle the day-to-day business of keeping things going. But the world also needs the Christopher Columbuses and the Lewis and Clarks and the John Glenns, the first person to orbit the Earth. And so, if Ulysses thinks that he's called to be one of those people, he seems justified to me in making the decision that he does. But what does this have to do with you? Most of you listening to this are young, not old. So what's the relevance? I think it is this. No matter our age, we all have one thing in common. We only have one life, and we only get to live it once. It's important to live it as well as we can, to get as much out of it as we can. And part of doing that is understanding who we are, what brings us fulfillment, and what allows us to contribute usefully to the world around us. Some of us are Telemachuses, and some of us are more like Ulysses. But whoever we are, it's important to discover that and live accordingly.